You never know where fate will lead you, or how a seemingly insignificant moment can change your entire life. For them, it was just a regular camping trip. 3 friends, some tents, a bonfire, and the starry sky. No one could have predicted that right there, deep in the wilderness, hundreds of miles from civilization, they would have an encounter that would change not only their lives but also the fate of a whole species of wild predators. They thought they were heading out to celebrate their success, but they ended up saving a life, and their own souls. Blue Lake greeted them with its serene, glassy surface reflecting fluffy clouds. It seemed as if nature itself was celebrating with them. No one sensed the danger. Yet, at that very moment, as they were happily setting up their tents, a tiny creature nearby, who had lost its mother, was fighting for its life, its weak cry for help barely a whisper. But this story started long before that. It began back in kindergarten in a small town when 3 boys met. There was Max, serious beyond his years, with a sharp, focused gaze and a determined spirit. He never cried, even when he fell off the swings, and he always shared his candy with his friends. Then there was Kyle, lively as a jackrabbit, a chatterbox and the group's ringleader. He could talk their teacher into giving them an extra hour of recess and somehow always avoided getting in trouble for his mischief. And there was Vlad, the quiet, thoughtful one with a surprisingly logical mind. By age 5, he could already explain why the sky was blue and the grass was green. "Hey, let's go build a fort," Kyle shouted one day. That simple invitation was the start of a friendship that would last for decades. They grew up together, sharing their joys and sorrows, their first F's and first crushes. When Max's parents died in a car accident, Vlad and Kyle never left his side. They stayed over at his house, helping him cope with the grief. When Kyle was diagnosed with a heart condition that required a costly surgery, Max and Vlad organized a fundraiser at their school, and then stayed up all night in the hospital waiting room. When older kids bullied Vlad for his glasses and his love of books, Max and Kyle stood up for him, even though they took a beating for it. After high school, against everyone's expectations, they didn't go their separate ways. Instead, they all enrolled in the local community college to study construction. Max because he loved working with his hands and could spend hours on complex projects. Kyle because he saw a future business in construction. Vlad because he was drawn to the engineering side of the job, the calculations and the blueprints. "Can you guys believe it?" Kyle said dreamily at their graduation party. "In 10 years, we'll have our own construction empire." Max just smiled and Vlad shook his head. But deep down, they all believed that together, they could do anything. They started small. Apartment renovations, tiling, installing doors. They worked hard and charged a fair price. Soon they earned a reputation as dependable pros. They invested their first earnings in tools and then hired some helpers. 3 years later, they registered their company, TryBuild. Kyle came up with the name in honor of the 3 inseparable founders. Max was in charge of the on-site work. His no-nonsense approach got even the laziest workers to pull their weight. Vlad handled the technical documents, created cost estimates, and made sure all the building codes were followed. And Kyle did what he did best: negotiating with clients. "You're not going to believe this, guys." He burst into the office one day, waving a folder of documents. "I just got back from a meeting with Sokolov." Sokolov was a major real estate developer they had only dreamed of working with. "And?" Max asked, looking up from his blueprints. "We got the contract to build the Forest Harbor community," Kyle announced, beaming. 30 houses, infrastructure, landscaping, the whole deal. "It's all ours." Vlad let out a low whistle. "That's a $100 million contract, right?" 280, Kyle corrected triumphantly. "Plus bonuses for finishing early." "We did it, guys. We're in the big leagues." They couldn't believe their luck. This was the big break they'd been waiting for. A contract that would take their small company to the next level. "We need to celebrate." Max smiled for the first time that day, a real smile. "I know just the place," Kyle said, winking at his friends. "Blue Lake. 3 days. No phones, no work. Just us, nature, and some good whiskey." Blue Lake was their special place. A deep, crystal-clear lake surrounded by wilderness. It was a 3-hour drive from the city. They had found it by accident years ago as college students who got lost on a hike. Since then, they'd gone back every year to fish, swim, or just sit by the fire, looking at the stars and sharing their dreams. When do we leave? Vlad asked, already making a mental list of things to finish before they left. Friday at dawn, Kyle decided. We'll spend 2 nights and get back Sunday evening. Then on Monday, we'll be ready to get back to work. They had no idea that this trip would become a turning point in their lives. They didn't know that deep in the wilderness, an encounter was waiting that would change them forever. They didn't know they would return as completely different people. As they happily talked about their upcoming vacation, hundreds of miles away, in the impenetrable depths of the forest, poachers were preparing their weapons for another hunt for a rare animal. The gray Friday morning was just beginning to turn pink with the sunrise as Max's old SUV left the city. Vlad settled into the front passenger seat with a map, while Kyle, sprawled in the back, scanned the radio for music. "Can you stop flipping through stations?" Max grumbled, his hands gripping the steering wheel. "You're giving me a headache." "Come on, don't be a grandpa," Kyle shot back. "A road trip needs a good soundtrack." "I found it." The car filled with the sound of old rock and roll, their favorite music since college. Vlad couldn't help but smile, remembering how 10 years ago, they had first set out for this lake. Back then, they only had one tent for the 3 of them, old sleeping bags and canned food. They got lost and got soaked in the rain, but when they finally reached the shore of Blue Lake, all their troubles were forgotten. "Remember when we almost dropped the food bag in the water?" Vlad asked, turning to his friends. "How could I forget?" Kyle laughed. "Max went to get it and almost drowned himself." "I didn't know how to swim back then," Max mumbled, but the stern expression on his face softened at the memory. The road twisted and turned through the hills, gradually leading them deeper into the forest. The asphalt turned to gravel, then to a dirt road, and finally to a barely visible forest path. Huge cedars and larches surrounded them on all sides, making it feel like they were entering another world, pristine, wild, and untouched by civilization. Over the years, these trips had become a sacred ritual. Here, on the shores of Blue Lake, they celebrated the most important moments of their lives. This is where Max first told them about Natasha, his future wife. This is where Kyle cried when he divorced his wife, Irina. This is where Vlad shared his dream of writing a book on the architecture of old Siberian cities. Blue Lake was more than just a place to relax. It was their own temple of friendship, a place of strength where they recharged and found answers to the toughest questions. "Just a little further," Vlad said, checking the map. "Our clearing should be right around that corner." The SUV groaned as it climbed the last hill, and a familiar sight came into view. A spacious clearing surrounded by ancient pines, and beyond it, the shimmering surface of the lake, so blue it looked like someone had painted the water. "Home," Kyle sighed, and that single word perfectly captured how they felt. They quickly unloaded their gear and started setting up camp. Over the years, they had developed a clear routine. Max was in charge of the tents, Vlad set up the bonfire and cooking area, and Kyle always went to find firewood and water. "All right, boys, I'm heading into the woods," Kyle said, throwing a folded canvas bag over his shoulder. "I'll see if there are any mushrooms, too." "Don't go too far," Vlad warned him, a familiar refrain. "Remember last year when you wandered off until dark?" "Relax," Kyle said, waving his hand. "I know this place like the back of my hand now. I'll be back in an hour." He disappeared among the trees, whistling a tune. Vlad and Max continued setting up camp, talking about the upcoming community project. "I think we'll need another crew of bricklayers," Max said, pounding tent stakes with a methodical rhythm, "and a separate project manager for this job." "I've already got the budget and schedule worked out," Vlad said, placing rocks around the future fire pit. "If we start next month, we can pour the foundations before winter and get the walls up in the spring." Time passed, the sun climbed to its peak and then began to sink toward the west. Vlad checked his watch and frowned. "Kyle's taking a while. It's been almost 2 hours." Max stopped what he was doing and looked at his watch too. You're right. You don't think he got lost? Maybe he found a ton of mushrooms? Vlad suggested, but his voice was already laced with worry. They finished setting up camp, but Kyle still hadn't returned. Vlad paced nervously around the clearing, glancing at the forest. Max sat by the unlit fire, tapping his fingers on his knee, a sure sign of his anxiety. Something's not right, he finally said. Kyle would have been back by now, even if he stumbled upon a whole field of mushrooms. Vlad nodded. We need to go look for him. They grabbed flashlights even though it wasn't dark yet, along with whistles and a compass. Max took his hatchet not so much for protection but out of habit. Kyle! Vlad yelled as soon as they entered the woods. Where are you? Only an echo answered him. They went deeper into the forest, calling out periodically and listening. The forest around them was alive with its own sounds. A woodpecker tapped somewhere, small animals rustled in the grass, and the wind whispered through the treetops, but there was no sign of Kyle. Let's split up, Max suggested. You go along the shoreline, and I'll go deeper into the woods. We'll meet back here in half an hour. Vlad shook his head. Bad idea. If you get lost too, I'll have to look for both of you. We're sticking together. They continued their search, moving in an expanding spiral away from the camp. Their anxiety grew with every minute. Horrifying stories about bears, wolves, and other dangers of the wilderness flashed through their minds. Maybe he fell and hurt his leg? Vlad guessed. Or he ran into someone unfriendly? Don't get yourself worked up, Max cut him off, but his own face showed his worry. Kyle's not a rookie in the woods. He'll be fine. But with every step and every minute of their fruitless search, their fear for their friend grew stronger. It was no longer lurking on the edge of their minds. It had clutched their hearts in its icy grip. Kyle! Vlad yelled again and then he froze. Wait, did you hear that? Max stopped. What? I thought I did. Vlad listened intently. Yeah, there it is again. From somewhere far off, barely audible, came a faint human voice. Kyle! Max shouted with all his might. And then they clearly heard a response. I'm here. Help! The voice was coming from the right, from the rocky ridge that rose in the forest about half a mile from the lake. The friends exchanged a look, and without a word, they took off toward the sound, pushing through bushes, jumping over fallen trees, not caring where they stepped. Their hearts pounded in their chests, not from the running, but from the fear for their friend and the hope that he was okay. What could have happened to Kyle in this familiar forest, where they had been dozens of times? And why did his voice sound so strange, like it was coming from underground? Vlad and Max tore through the woods, ignoring the path. Branches whipped their faces and thorny bushes snagged their clothes, but they didn't notice these minor annoyances. Kyle's voice grew clearer, and now they could tell it was coming from somewhere below. I'm here in a crevice, Kyle yelled. Careful up there, don't fall in. They ran out into a small clearing among the rocks. Gray, moss-covered boulders loomed around them like ancient monuments. Between the two largest boulders, a narrow, dark crack yawned, leading somewhere down below. Kyle! Vlad got on his knees at the edge of the crevice. Are you in there? Yeah. His friend's voice came out muffled but strong. I'm okay. My leg feels like it's twisted, but that's not the most important thing. Max also knelt and, after gauging the width of the crevice, pulled a small flashlight out of his pocket. The beam of light cut through the darkness, picking out Kyle's bright jacket about 15 feet below them. He was sitting with his back to a rock wall, holding something wrapped in a sweater to his chest. How did you get down there? Max asked, confused. I'll tell you later. Kyle's voice was impatient. First, we have to get him out. Get who out? Vlad asked, not understanding. Kyle carefully opened a corner of the sweater, and something glittered in the flashlight beam. Two tiny eyes looked up at them with a mix of fear and curiosity. What is that? Max squinted, trying to make out the creature. It's a tiger cub, Kyle said, gently adjusting the sweater. He was down at the bottom, already so hoarse from crying. He's barely alive. He's all wet and shivering. I went down to get him, but I couldn't get back up. It's too narrow and I twisted my ankle. Vlad and Max stared at each other in shock. A tiger cub? Here in the wild, hundreds of miles from the habitat of Amur tigers? Are you sure it's a tiger cub? Vlad asked again. Maybe it's a lynx or something? I'm telling you it's a tiger cub. Kyle's voice was irritated. He has stripes just like in the pictures. I don't know why he's here, but if we don't save him, he's going to die. Max quickly assessed the situation. Okay, we'll get the animal out first, then you. We don't have any rope. I saw a long dry branch on the way here, Vlad remembered. I'll go get it. He rushed back into the woods and returned a few minutes later, dragging a long dry log. After clearing it of small branches, they lowered one end into the crevice. Tie the sweater with the cub to the stick, Max ordered. Make sure it's tight so he doesn't fall. Kyle carefully, trying not to disturb the baby animal, attached the bundle to the end of the branch, using the sleeves of the sweater as rope. Done, he said, pulling his hands away. Just pull him up slowly. He's really weak. Vlad and Max slowly, inch by inch, began to raise the makeshift bundle. When it was almost at the top, the sweater slipped, and the cub nearly fell back into the crevice, but Vlad caught him right at the edge. Oh my God, he gasped, unwrapping the sweater. A tiny tiger cub lay before them, striped, with a disproportionately large head and thin legs. Its fur was wet and dirty. Its amber eyes were cautious, but they no longer held fear. It seemed to understand that these strange two-legged creatures wouldn't harm it. He's so small, Max whispered, gently touching the cub's striped head. Maybe 2 months old tops. The cub let out a weak meow. The sound was like the pitiful cry of a kitten, only hoarser, as if it had truly lost its voice from calling for help. Now get me out, Kyle said from the bottom of the crevice. It's cold and damp down here and my leg hurts. Getting their friend out was harder than getting the cub out. Max fashioned a sort of rope from his belt and Vlad's shirt, and Kyle, pulling himself up with his arms, struggled to climb out. His face was pale with pain. His right foot was twisted at an unnatural angle. Looks like a sprain, Max said, examining the ankle. Can you walk back to camp? I'll manage, Kyle winced. It's not my first time. But his gaze was fixed on the cub, which Vlad was still holding in the sweater. How did he even get down there? Vlad asked, carefully wrapping the animal up. Kyle, leaning on Max's shoulder, slowly stood up. I was collecting firewood and heard a little squeak. I thought a kitten had gotten lost, but what would a cat be doing in the wilderness? I followed the sound and found that crevice. I looked inside and there he was sitting at the bottom, shivering, crying so pathetically. He had already lost his voice. And you, of course, went down to save him, Max chuckled. What was I supposed to do? Kyle asked indignantly. Leave him there to die. The crevice isn't that deep, maybe 15 feet tops. I got down fine and picked him up. He didn't even resist. He must have been completely out of energy. But I couldn't get back out. The walls were slick and the crevice gets narrower at the top. And I sprained my ankle when I tried to pull myself up. Vlad gently stroked the cub's head. But where did he come from? As far as I know, the nearest population of Amur tigers is hundreds of miles from here. That's the weirdest part, Kyle frowned. Tiger cubs don't wander far from their mothers. So either the mother is nearby, or something happened to her. The thought made all three of them look around nervously. Running into an enraged tiger looking for its cub was not on their weekend agenda. We need to get back to camp, Max decided. It's getting dark soon. We'll figure out what to do with the cub there. The trip back took much longer. Kyle limped along, leaning on his friend's shoulder, while Vlad carefully carried the cub, who seemed to have resigned himself to his fate and lay quietly in the sweater, only occasionally lifting his head to look around. They reached the camp just as dusk was settling in. Max immediately built a fire, and Vlad made a bed for the cub out of a blanket right by the flames. The little animal was so exhausted that he didn't resist when he was placed on the blanket, and he even allowed them to examine him. He's severely dehydrated, Vlad concluded. And hungry. What do you think tiger cubs eat at this age? Milk, I guess, Kyle suggested, rubbing his sore leg. We have condensed milk. They diluted the condensed milk with warm water and tried to give the cub a drink from the thermos lid. To their surprise, the cub eagerly lapped up the mixture, showing signs of life. Look at that, he's drinking. Kyle smiled, watching the cub. After he had his fill, the little animal curled up into a ball on the blanket and fell asleep, trusting enough to snuggle against Kyle's hand. The three friends sat by the fire, looking at this miracle of nature that had accidentally fallen into their hands, and tried to figure out what to do next. The main question is, where is his mother? Vlad said quietly, voicing the thought that was bothering all of them. A tigress would never abandon her cub, unless something happened to her, Max finished grimly. They didn't yet know how prophetic those words would be, or that this little striped bundle, so cozily settled by their fire, would change their lives forever. The flames danced merrily in the night, chasing away the cold and casting strange shadows on the trees. The friends sat around the bonfire, sipping hot tea and looking at the sleeping cub. The tiny predator was curled into a ball on the blanket, its paws tucked against its belly, and its nose covered by its fluffy tail. Sometimes it would twitch in its sleep and whimper softly, as if having nightmares. Tell us more about how you found him, Vlad said, handing Kyle a mug of tea. Kyle carefully shifted on the log, trying not to disturb his injured leg. I didn't go too far from camp, he began. I was collecting kindling, looking for dry sticks. I wanted to look for mushrooms too. The porcini mushrooms were great around here last year. And then I heard a squeak. At first I thought it was a bird or maybe a mouse or a chipmunk. But the sound was strange, not like anything from the forest. He took a sip of tea and continued. The sound got louder and then softer, like the wind was carrying it. I followed it and came to those rocks. You know, the ones with the huge boulders like giants playing marbles and leaving them behind. And that's where the cub was. Max tossed another branch into the fire. Not right away. I wandered between the rocks, listening. Then I realized the sound was coming from somewhere below. I found that crevice, a narrow, long crack in the ground. I shined my phone's flashlight down there. And at the very bottom, this little guy was sitting, shivering, all wet and dirty, crying and crying. He had already lost his voice. It was just a raspy sound. Kyle paused, looking at the sleeping cub, then continued. I didn't even realize it was a tiger cub at first. I thought it was some kind of lost kitten. Although, what would a house cat be doing in the wilderness? Then I looked closer, he had stripes. That's when I realized it was a tiger cub. Little, completely helpless. And you, of course, went to save him, Vlad said, shaking his head. Without a rope, without a harness. What was I supposed to do? Kyle retorted. Leave him there to die. The crevice wasn't that deep, maybe 15 feet at most. I got down fine and picked him up. He didn't even fight. He must have been completely out of energy. But I couldn't climb back out. The walls are slick, and the crevice gets narrower toward the top. I also sprained my leg when I tried to pull myself up. The cub stirred in his sleep, meowed softly, and then fell silent again. Vlad carefully adjusted the edge of the blanket, tucking the small predator in. I wonder how long he was down there, he said thoughtfully. Judging by his condition, at least a day, maybe more. The important thing is something else, Max said, looking up from the fire. How did he get there? And where's his mother? The question hung in the air. All three of them knew that a cub this young couldn't have wandered into the crevice on its own, so far from its mother. Maybe he fell in by accident? Vlad suggested. And the tigress couldn't get him out and left? Kyle shook his head. A tigress would never abandon her cub. Never. They're incredibly protective mothers. She would have stayed nearby, called for help, tried to save him. And there were no tracks around the crevice. No animal, no human. Unless, Max didn't finish his sentence, but they all knew what he was thinking. Unless something happened to her, Vlad said quietly. Something or someone. The friends fell silent, staring into the fire. The thought that a tigress could have been killed by poachers somewhere in the wilderness was a difficult one to accept. But another thought was even heavier, and no one dared to voice it. What if the tigress was still alive and somewhere nearby? Listen, Kyle said with a nervous laugh. What are we going to do if his mom shows up? I doubt she'll say thank you for saving her baby. That's not funny, Max grumbled. Running into an enraged tigress is the last thing we need. Maybe we should take the cub back to the crevice? Vlad suggested hesitantly. What if the tigress comes back and finds him there? And leave him to die? Kyle demanded. Can't you see the condition he's in? Without help, he won't survive another day. Vlad sighed. You're right. But we can't take him back to the city with us either. He's not some stray cat. He's a wild animal. A protected species at that. We'll have to head to the nearest town in the morning, Max decided. There should be game wardens or rangers there. Let them decide what to do with him. Kyle gently stroked the sleeping cub. It's just a shame our trip got ruined. But we saved a life, Vlad smiled. That's worth more than any vacation. Suddenly he fell silent. From the dark forest came the sound of a branch snapping. Then another. Something was moving toward their camp, not trying to hide or be quiet. Max immediately straightened up. He grabbed the hatchet lying next to the fire. Vlad felt for the knife on his belt. Kyle, despite his injured leg, sat up, shielding the sleeping cub. A bear, Vlad whispered. Max shook his head. A bear is louder. A tigress. Kyle's voice was filled with genuine fear. The snapping sound came again, closer now. Something large was approaching the clearing, pushing aside the bushes. Their hearts hammered in their chests. They had no firearms or experience fighting wild predators. If this was truly the tigress coming for her cub, they didn't stand a chance. The seconds dragged on agonizingly. Every heartbeat echoed in their ears. Fear paralyzed them, but the resolve to protect the small, defenseless creature was stronger. The bushes at the edge of the clearing parted, and a massive figure stepped into the light of the bonfire. But it wasn't a tigress, it was... The bushes at the edge of the clearing parted, and a massive figure stepped into the light of the bonfire. But it wasn't a tigress. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, in camouflage with a rifle on his shoulder. His weathered, wrinkled face spoke of many years spent outdoors, and a keen gaze from under his bushy eyebrows instantly took in the scene. The friends breathed a sigh of relief but didn't fully relax. A stranger with a rifle in the middle of nowhere isn't always a good sign. Evenin', campers, the man said in a raspy voice. Didn't expect company? Evening, Max said, lowering the hatchet but not letting go of it. Who are you? Name's Mike. I'm the local game warden. The man took another step toward the fire, and the flames lit up his face. I was doing my rounds and saw the fire. Thought I'd check on who was out here. You've got a good safe spot. We've been here before, Vlad nodded. We know the rules. Fire in the pit, take our trash with us, no cutting down trees. Mike smiled, but it was a little sad. I can see you're decent people. He looked at Kyle, who was still shielding the cub. What do you have there? Is it hurt? The friends exchanged a look. There was no point in lying. The game warden would see the cub anyway. We found a baby animal in the woods, Max said. Or rather, Kyle found him in a crevice between the rocks. What kind of baby animal? Mike frowned and came closer. Kyle carefully moved aside, revealing the sleeping cub. The warden's face changed instantly. His eyebrows shot up, and his eyes held a mix of surprise and relief. A tiger cub, he breathed, kneeling next to the blanket. A real Amur tiger cub. So that's what it was. His voice sounded strange, as if he had just found the answer to a question that had been tormenting him. You knew about him? Vlad asked, surprised. Mike didn't answer right away. He gently touched the cub's striped head, checked its condition, like an experienced veterinarian, and looked at its paws and inside its mouth. The cub didn't even wake up. It was so exhausted. I didn't just know, the warden finally said. I've been looking for him for 3 days. Searched the whole forest. I didn't think I'd find him alive. But where did a tiger even come from? Max asked, making room for him by the fire. As far as I know, they live much farther east. Mike sighed heavily and sat down on a log. He was silent for a few seconds, looking at the fire as if gathering his thoughts. It's a long story, he finally said. And it's a sad one. About 3 years ago, a private wildlife preserve was opened not far from here. A wealthy man from the city, a nature lover, bought a large piece of the forest and brought in animals, including a pair of Amur tigers, a male and a female. He wanted to bring the species back to this area. They were in a fenced but spacious enclosure. The conditions were good. Last year, the tigress had a litter of 3 cubs. Her first litter, too. The warden took a flask out of his pocket, took a drink and continued. A week ago, some poachers got into the preserve. Chinese most likely. They cut the fence and went into the enclosure. They shot the male right away. He rushed to protect his family. They wounded the tigress, but she managed to get away with the cubs. She broke through the damaged fence and disappeared into the woods. And you were looking for them? Kyle asked. Of course, Mike nodded. Our whole team of wardens searched the forest. 3 days ago, we found the tigress dead. The wound was fatal. She had bled out. 2 of the cubs were next to her, also dead. Looks like they died of hunger and cold, but the third one wasn't there. I was hoping he was alive and I searched everywhere. And here he is. Mike looked at the sleeping cub again, and there was a hint of moisture in his stern eyes. How did he end up in the crevice? Vlad asked. I can only guess, the warden shrugged. The tigress, sensing she was about to die, might have tried to hide her cubs. This one probably fell into the crevice and she couldn't get him out. Or maybe he wandered in there himself, scared of something after his mother died. The friends were silent, stunned by the story. The small striped creature on the blanket suddenly became a symbol of something more. Its mother's bravery, the poacher's cruelty, the fragility of life. What's going to happen to him now? Kyle finally asked, gently stroking the cub. I'm taking him to a rehabilitation center, Mike replied. We have experienced specialists there. We'll hand-feed him and get him back on his feet. Then, maybe we'll return him to the wild if he learns to hunt. If not, he'll stay at the preserve. Will he make it? Vlad asked anxiously. Mike carefully examined the cub again. Thanks to you guys, yes. Another day in that crevice and it would have been too late. You saved his life, fellas. The words sounded especially profound in the night silence. The 3 friends looked at each other, realizing that they had accidentally become a part of something important. What about the poachers? Max frowned. Did you catch them? The warden's face darkened. Not yet, but we're going to. They're still out here somewhere in the woods. The tracks are fresh. They're probably looking for the other tigers from the preserve. He shook his head. If you only knew how much a tiger or its organs are worth on the black market. For some people, it's a fortune. Mike carefully picked up the sleeping cub, wrapping him in the blanket. I need to go. I have to get this little guy to the specialists as soon as possible. Can we find out how he's doing? Kyle asked, surprising even himself. I mean, can we follow up on his fate? The warden looked at him intently, then at Vlad and Max. You're really interested? Of course, the friends answered in unison. Something changed in Mike's expression, as if he had made a decision. All right then. Come back here in a year at the same time. I'll tell you everything. And I'll show you something too. He smiled slightly. Just don't mix up the dates. Exactly 1 year from today. We promise, Kyle said firmly. Mike nodded, carefully holding the bundle with the cub close to his chest, and headed back into the woods. At the edge of the clearing, he turned back. Be careful. And if you see or hear anything suspicious, don't try to be a hero. Poachers are dangerous people. And with those words, he disappeared into the darkness of the night, carrying with him the small life they had miraculously saved from death. The friends stayed by the fire, shaken by everything that had happened. The story had turned out to be much darker and more serious than they had imagined. And deep down, each of them already knew that in a year, They would definitely return to Blue Lake to find out the fate of the small striped creature who had so unexpectedly entered their lives. The friends sat by the fire for a long time after Mike left, watching the flames and discussing the incredible events of the day. Kyle looked especially thoughtful. He silently stared at his hands, as if he could still feel the warmth of the tiny striped body. "What's with you?" Vlad asked, tossing another branch into the fire. Kyle shrugged. "It's just weird. A few hours ago, I didn't even know this cub existed." He paused, searching for the right words. "And now I feel a sense of responsibility, you know? Like I've been entrusted with something important." "You saved his life," Max said, patting his friend on the shoulder. "It's natural to feel a connection. Do you think Mike was telling the truth?" Kyle looked up. "Will he really take care of the little guy?" "He doesn't seem like the kind of man who makes empty promises," Vlad said thoughtfully. "You can tell he takes his job seriously. And he obviously cares about that cub, too." "He was looking for him for days." Max nodded. "I agree. Besides, we did our part. We saved the animal from the crevice. The rest is up to the specialists." "I still want to know what happens to him," Kyle said stubbornly. "I'll definitely be back here in a year. You guys can do what you want, but I'm coming." "We promised," Vlad smiled. "We'll all come back together." Max chuckled. "Who would have thought that our tough construction guy, Kyle, would get so attached to a kitten?" "He's not a kitten," Kyle said indignantly. "He's an Amur tiger, a protected species, by the way. And I'm not attached, I just—" He didn't finish the sentence, waving his hand. The friends exchanged knowing glances. They all felt something similar. A strange mix of anxiety and pride, as if they had touched something significant and important. The rest of the night was restless. Kyle couldn't fall asleep for a long time, listening to the sounds of the forest and thinking about the little tiger cub. Vlad tossed and turned, remembering the game warden's story about the poachers. Max went out of the tent several times to check the surroundings. Mike's words about dangerous people wandering through the wilderness made him stay on guard. The morning was clear and fresh. They decided not to pack up camp. After all, they had come to relax. They spent the day fishing, but their conversation kept coming back to the tiger cub and his fate. "I wonder what they'll name him," Kyle mused, casting his fishing line. "Do they even name animals at preserves?" "They might," Vlad replied. "Especially if he's going to live around people." "What would you name him?" Kyle thought for a moment. "Maybe Sinya," he said, using a nickname for the word blue in Russian. "In honor of Blue Lake where we found him." "That's a terrible name for a tiger," Max laughed. "It sounds like he got beaten up." "Then what about Blue?" Kyle didn't give up. "Or Lake?" "I'm sure the specialists will come up with something better," Vlad smiled. "The most important thing is that he survives and grows up healthy." On Sunday evening, they returned to the city, taking with them not only memories of their trip, but also the incredible story of saving a tiger cub. In a strange way, this story brought them even closer, though it seemed impossible to get any closer. Life returned to its normal rhythm. Work began on the Forest Harbor project, a massive undertaking for their small company. Their days were filled with blueprints, budgets, and negotiations with subcontractors. Gradually, the memory of the tiger cub faded into the background, although sometimes, during rare moments of rest, the friends would return to the topic. "Do you think he's grown up yet?" Kyle would ask when they gathered at the office after a day's work. "I'm sure he has," Vlad would nod. "Tigers grow quickly in their first year." "I wonder if he remembers us?" Kyle would say thoughtfully. "Or has he forgotten us like we were never there?" "Animals don't forget those who help them," Max would say confidently, "especially in critical moments." The housing community grew before their eyes. By spring, the foundations for all 30 homes had been laid. The walls went up in the summer, and interior finishing began in the fall. There was so much work that the friends sometimes literally spent the night on the construction site. TriBuild hired 20 more workers, expanded the office, and acquired its own equipment. It wasn't until April, A month before the first phase was due, that Cal suddenly remembered. Guys, we promised. Almost a year has passed. We'll have to go back to Blue Lake soon. Vlad raised his eyebrows in surprise. You seriously remember? With how busy we've been. Of course I remember, Cal said, a little offended. I said I wanted to know how our tiger cub was doing. We promised, Mike. Max smirked. Well, if we promised, we have to go. Besides, we'll finish the first phase of the project right around that time. We'll have something to celebrate. And so, exactly 1 year after that memorable trip, Max's SUV once again left the city at dawn on a Friday. This time, they weren't just going to relax. They were going to keep a promise they had made to a game warden and find out the fate of the tiger cub they had saved. The road seemed familiar every turn. The same scenery outside the window, the same music, the same conversations. It was as if nothing had changed in the past year. But something was different. They had changed themselves. They were more confident and more successful. Their company had grown and was on its feet. Do you think Mike will show up? Vlad asked as they entered the forest. Or did he forget his promise? He'll show up, Kyle said confidently. He doesn't seem like the kind of person who makes empty promises. By noon, they had reached the familiar clearing by Blue Lake. Everything was just as it had been a year ago. The same trees surrounding them, the same view of the water's surface, the same feeling of peace and tranquility. They quickly set up camp, 2 tents, a fire pit, and unpacked their gear. This time, Max and Vlad went to find firewood together, while Kyle stayed at the camp because of his old leg injury, which sometimes acted up in damp weather. The day passed with the usual outdoor activities: fishing, swimming in the cool water of the lake, and making fish soup over the fire. But all 3 of them kept looking toward the forest, waiting for the game warden to appear. However, Mike didn't show up during the day or in the evening. Maybe tomorrow, Kyle said hopefully as they sat by the fire under the starry sky. We didn't agree on an exact time. Maybe he forgot, Max shrugged. A game warden has a lot going on. Or maybe something happened to the cub, Vlad said quietly, and all 3 of them fell silent, not wanting to think about that possibility. The night passed peacefully, and in the morning, they returned to their usual activities, still waiting for Mike. But the warden didn't show up, and their hope of seeing him gradually faded. Well, that's that, Max said by Saturday afternoon. Looks like we're not destined to find out how this story ends. Let's start packing. We're leaving tomorrow. And then, as if in response to his words, the sound of branches cracking came from the forest. Someone was approaching their camp quickly, almost running. The sound of branches cracking came from the forest. Someone was approaching their camp quickly, almost running. The friends watched the green wall of trees intently, ready for anything. Max instinctively reached for the hatchet lying by the fire. The bushes parted, and Mike practically stumbled into the clearing. He looked nothing like he had a year ago. His face was gaunt, with deep shadows under his eyes. His clothes were wrinkled and torn in places, as if he had been struggling through thorny bushes. The warden was breathing heavily, as if he had been running for a long time. You're alive, he breathed, looking them over with a quick glance. Thank God I made it in time. Mike! Kyle jumped up from the log he was sitting on. We thought you weren't going to come. What happened? The warden raised a hand, signaling for silence, and for a few seconds, he listened to the sounds of the forest, as if afraid of being pursued. Then he relaxed a little and came closer to the fire. Are you sure you're alone? He asked quietly. Did anyone else come here? No one, Max replied, puzzled. What's going on? Mike dropped heavily onto a log and rubbed his face with his hands, as if trying to wipe away his exhaustion. We have a problem, boys, he finally said. A big problem. The poachers I told you about last year have returned. And this time there are more of them, and they're better prepared. Vlad moved closer. What about the cub? Is he okay? A strange smile flashed across the warden's face. The cub? Oh, he's just fine. He's grown and gotten strong over the past year. Thank you again for getting him out of that crevice. If it weren't for you. He didn't finish the sentence and again listened to the sounds of the forest. His behavior was starting to worry his friends. Something was clearly wrong. So what about the poachers? Max cut to the chase. Are they hunting tigers again? Not just tigers, Mike said grimly. Everything that moves. Hides, antlers, organs for traditional medicine. Everything is fair game. A whole gang of them. I found their trail 3 days ago. I've been tracking them ever since. They've already killed 2 boars, an elk, and a deer. And this morning. He fell silent as if searching for words. This morning they killed a tiger, a full-grown male. The last adult male in our preserve. Oh my God, Vlad gasped. That's the end, Mike finished grimly. If we don't stop them, they'll wipe out the entire population we've worked so long and so hard to rebuild. And not just the tigers, everything living in the area. Kyle frowned. Isn't that a job for the police or some kind of special team? The warden gave a bitter chuckle. The police? The nearest station is a 6-hour drive away. By the time they get here and figure things out, the poachers will be long gone. They're not stupid, they move fast. Here today, 100 miles away tomorrow, and the goods are already across the border. No, there's no help coming from anywhere. He looked at each of the friends carefully. You promised to come back in a year. I remembered and I waited. But I never thought I would have to ask you for help. What kind of help? Max asked on guard. Mike straightened up, and a look of determination lit up his eyes. I tracked them to their camp. They're not far from here, about 3 miles north. They're butchering their kill, getting ready to move it. There are 4 of them and they're all armed. I can't take them on by myself, but there are 3 of you. Hold on, Max raised a hand. You're asking us to go up against armed poachers? That's dangerous and it's probably illegal. Illegal? Mike said indignantly. Is it legal to kill an endangered species? I'm an official warden. I have the right to apprehend criminals, and you will be, in a sense, my witnesses. He reached behind his back and opened a worn backpack. Inside were 2 hunting rifles. Take these, he said, holding the guns out to Max and Kyle. This is for a last resort. I'm not suggesting you shoot them, just to show them we're serious. The friends looked at each other. The situation was getting more and more tense and dangerous. It was one thing to save a helpless tiger cub. It was another thing entirely to go up against armed criminals. What if they start shooting? Vlad whispered. We're not prepared for something like that. They won't shoot if they see we outnumber them, Mike said confidently. They're not thugs, they're just poachers. Greedy, ruthless toward animals but not people killers. Plus, we'll catch them by surprise when they're busy butchering the animals. He looked at the friends. I know I'm asking a lot, but think about this. The cub you saved a year ago might become the last Amur tiger in our area if we don't stop these people. Everything the preserve has worked for, all the effort to restore the population, will be for nothing. Without hesitation, Kyle took the rifle Mike offered. I'm in, he said. We didn't save that little guy just to have his relatives wiped out. Max sighed heavily. Damn it, Kyle. I knew you'd say that. He turned to Mike. I'm in too. I can't let this hotshot be a hero on his own. Vlad hesitated. Guys, maybe we should call the police on a satellite phone? I don't have a satellite phone. Mike shook his head. And there's no time to wait. The poachers could leave at any moment. Right now, they're resting after the hunt and butchering their kill. It's the perfect time to catch them. Vlad looked at his friends, then at the warden, and nodded decisively. Fine, I'm with you, but I'm against any violence. We're just apprehending them, that's it. Of course, Mike nodded. Like I said, the rifles are just to scare them. He handed Vlad a hunting knife in a leather sheath. Here, hold this. Just in case. Vlad reluctantly took the knife, feeling its unfamiliar weight in his hand. Just yesterday, they were ordinary businessmen, builders who had come to relax in nature, and today they were preparing for a dangerous mission against poachers. Their world had been turned upside down in an instant. When do we move out? Max asked briskly, checking the rifle. Right now, Mike said, getting to his feet. We have about an hour's walk through the woods. We have to get there before dark. He looked at his friends. Just take the essentials and dress warmly. It gets cold in the evening. They quickly gathered a few things: water flasks, a little food, and flashlights. Mike checked the weapons one last time and nodded. Let's go. And remember, silence is key. Not a word unless absolutely necessary. Follow me. Be extremely careful. And with those words, he moved into the thicket, leading the three friends, who still hadn't fully grasped what they were getting into. Ahead of them was a confrontation with people for whom the life of a rare animal wasn't worth a dime. And this encounter could be dangerous not only for the poachers but for them as well. The forest surrounded them, dense and wary. Tall cedars and larches hid the sky, letting in only a few rays of sunlight. Dry branches crunched under their feet, and last year's leaves rustled. Mike moved quickly and silently like a ghost, only occasionally turning back to make sure his companions weren't falling behind. Vlad was last, and he had time to think. Everything that was happening seemed strange, even unreal. Here they were, three city guys used to blueprints and budgets, creeping through the wilderness with weapons in their hands, preparing to face poachers. And all this at the request of a man they had only met once. What do we even know about Mike? Vlad thought, watching the warden's broad back. Maybe he's a poacher himself? Or maybe he has a personal vendetta against those men. What if this is some kind of trap? But then he immediately checked himself. No, that didn't seem right. The anxiety in his eyes was too genuine. The pain for the dead animals was real. And why would he lie to them? They weren't rich or important. Hold on, Mike suddenly whispered, raising his hand. Listen. They froze. At first, Vlad heard nothing but the usual forest sounds. Rustling leaves, a distant woodpecker's tapping, the buzzing of insects. But then he made out a strange sound, a metallic clanging and muffled voices. People, Max whispered. They're close, Mike nodded. About a quarter of a mile from here. We need to be extra careful now. Not a sound. They crawled forward even more slowly, trying not to brush against branches or rustle the leaves. The closer they got to the source of the sound, the clearer the voices became, rough, with a distinct accent. They were speaking Russian, but they were clearly not Russian. Finally, Mike gestured for them to stop and lie down. They carefully parted the bushes and saw a small clearing among the trees. The sight that awaited them made them freeze in horror and disgust. In the clearing, two men of Asian descent were busily butchering the carcass of a large animal. The enormous striped beast lay on its side, lifeless, but still majestic even in death. The tiger was beautiful. Its powerful body, with striped fur that had only recently glistened in the sun as the predator silently moved through the trees, was now covered in blood. The men were methodically skinning it, exposing muscles and bones. Off to the side, two other men were sitting by a small fire, talking and smoking. Nearby were backpacks, sleeping bags, and most disturbingly, hunting rifles. The sight took Vlad's breath away. Kyle clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. Max frowned, watching and assessing the situation. Mike crawled back and motioned for them to follow. After moving to a safe distance, he began to explain his plan in a whisper. There are 4 of them and 4 of us. But they have the advantage. They're all armed and ready to shoot. We have to use a trick. Here's what I propose. Max and I will go in from the front and distract them. And you and Kyle. He nodded at Vlad. You'll go around the clearing and come in from the back. On my signal, 3 short whistles, we'll come out at the same time and surround them. What if they start shooting? Vlad whispered. They won't, Mike said confidently. They're not murderers, they're just poachers. Besides, when they see they're surrounded, they'll know that resisting is useless. The plan was simple but risky. However, they had no other options. Vlad and Kyle went to circle around, trying to move as quietly as possible. They had to crawl, hide behind trees, and freeze at the slightest rustle. When they finally got behind the poachers' camp, Kyle whispered, "Ready?" Vlad nodded. even though his stomach was twisted in fear. They waited, anticipating Mike's signal. The minutes stretched on agonizingly. Through the gaps between the trees, they saw the poachers continuing their gruesome work. One of them, seemingly the leader, was giving instructions to the others. They were packing parts of the tiger's carcass into plastic bags, carefully putting away their blood-stained tools. Finally, the signal came. 3 short whistles like a bird's trill. Kyle nodded at Vlad, and they emerged from behind the trees, their weapons aimed at the poachers. "Hold it! Hands up!" Mike shouted, appearing from the opposite side of the clearing with Max. "Nobody move!" The poachers jumped in surprise. One of them lunged for a rifle, but Max raised his gun as a warning. "Don't even think about it." The second poacher said something quickly in his language, and the first one froze. All 4 of them slowly raised their hands, sizing up the situation. Their eyes darted between their opponents, clearly trying to find a weak spot in the circle. "Face down, hands behind your head," Mike commanded, slowly approaching with his rifle ready. "Move it." The poachers reluctantly obeyed, lying on the ground. Mike quickly searched them, taking their knives and other weapons. Then he tied their hands with a rope he had wisely brought with him. "That's it," he said, satisfied. "We got him." Only then, when the immediate danger had passed, could Vlad get closer to the dead tiger. The sight was horrifying. The majestic beast, who had so recently been the king of the forest, now lay butchered like an animal in a slaughterhouse. Its vibrant orange fur with black stripes had been partially removed, revealing red meat and white bones. The animal's open, glassy eyes seemed to be looking at him with a reproachful stare. "What a pointless act of cruelty," Vlad whispered, feeling a lump rise in his throat. Kyle walked over and put a hand on his shoulder. "Now do you see why I wanted to come back and find out what happened to the cub? These lowlifes." He nodded toward the tied-up poachers. They would have done the same thing to him without a second thought. Max methodically gathered the poachers' weapons and tools, piling them to the side. "What do we do with them now?" he asked Mike. "The nearest town is far away. We can't carry them on our backs." "They must have a car somewhere nearby," the warden replied. "We'll find it, put these guys in it, and take them to the police. For now, we'll have to stand guard here." Vlad still couldn't take his eyes off the dead tiger. "Can we at least bury him?" he asked quietly. "We can't just leave him like this." Mike nodded seriously. "Of course. But first we need to take pictures of everything as it is, as proof. Then we'll bury him properly." A strange feeling came over Vlad. A mix of sadness from what he had seen and satisfaction that justice had prevailed. They had done what they had to do. They had saved other animals from the same fate. And maybe they had even saved the cub they had pulled out of the crevice a year ago. "Wait," Kyle suddenly said, turning to Mike. "You promised to tell us what happened to our cub. How is he?" A strange smile appeared on the warden's face. "The cub? Oh, he's doing great. I'm not just going to tell you. I'm going to show you. But not now. First, we'll finish with these guys." He nodded at the poachers. "And then you'll get a surprise." And something in his voice, a mysterious note, made the friends look at each other with anticipation. It seemed the story of the little striped animal they had saved a year ago wasn't over yet, and its ending promised to be surprising. The sun was already setting when they loaded the tied-up poachers into an old Uzi van they had found nearby. The vehicle belonged to the criminals themselves and would now take them straight into the hands of justice. "I'll take them to the district center," Mike said, taking the keys from the captives. "There's a police station there. We'll handle everything legally. Should one of us go with you?" Max offered. "Just in case." The warden shook his head. "No need. I can handle it myself. I've done this before. You guys go back to the camp. I'll be back as soon as I drop these guys off." "But that's a few hours' drive," Vlad pointed out. "Will you make it back before dark?" "I won't," Mike admitted honestly. "I'll be back tomorrow morning, and you'll have some time to rest after today's adventure." He winked at Kyle. "And to prepare for a meeting." "What meeting?" Kyle asked, confused. But Mike just smiled mysteriously. You'll see. Just promise me you won't leave before I get back. You'll wait for me. Of course we'll wait, Kyle nodded. We came all this way just to find out about the cub. Mike got into the cab of the UAZ. That's good to hear. Wait for me around 9 tomorrow morning. And thank you guys. I couldn't have done it without you. He started the engine and the car, bouncing on the uneven road, disappeared among the trees. The friends were left alone in the middle of the forest road. Well, Max said, adjusting his backpack on his shoulder, let's go back to camp. It had been an eventful day. They walked in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The events of the last few hours seemed unreal. The chase for the poachers, the arrest of the criminals, the sight of the dead tiger. All of it was so far from their normal lives as builders, from budgets, blueprints, and meetings. You know, Kyle said suddenly, breaking the silence, I keep thinking about that cub. I wonder how big he's gotten. Would he recognize us now? Animals remember those who help them, Vlad said thoughtfully, especially in critical moments. I've read that elephants, for example, can remember a person for decades. But tigers aren't elephants, Max pointed out. Besides, he was just a little guy when we found him. Still, Kyle said stubbornly, I'm sure he would recognize us. And did you notice how strangely Mike smiled when I asked about the cub? It's like he knows something we don't. Yeah, Vlad nodded. And what was that about preparing for a meeting? Who is the meeting with? Maybe he's bringing pictures of the cub, Max suggested. Or a video. Or maybe, Kyle stumbled, as if afraid to voice his thought, maybe he's bringing the cub himself? If he grew up in the preserve, he's probably used to people. They continued to discuss the possibilities until they reached their camp at Blue Lake. Everything was just as they had left it that morning. The tents, the extinguished fire, the fishing gear. It felt as if the crazy events of the day had happened in some other world. Max immediately started a fire, and Vlad got dinner supplies out of his bag. Kyle sat down on a log, looking at the calm surface of the lake. The evening sunset painted the water in purple hues, creating a scene of incredible beauty. You know, he said softly, I'm glad we came back here, even with this whole poacher business. This place, it's special. Vlad nodded, sitting down next to him. I agree. It's not just about the beauty of nature. Something important happens here, something that changes us. Philosophers, Max chuckled, fanning the fire. Help me with dinner instead. After a day like this, I could eat a horse. They had dinner by the fire, recalling the day's events and speculating about what Mike had in store for them tomorrow. Gradually, the conversation shifted to more familiar topics: work, construction, and future plans. We'll have to add new materials to the budget, Max said, pouring tea into mugs. Prices have gone up by 15% in the last month. And I think we should hire another foreman, Vlad added. Have you noticed how much trouble Pete is having? If we take on a second project, it'll be a disaster. Kyle was only half listening. His mind was elsewhere. He was imagining the little cub they had saved a year ago. What had he become? Was he healthy? Did he remember the people who had pulled him from his stone trap? Night fell on the forest. Stars dotted the dark sky, reflecting in the mirrored surface of Blue Lake. The friends went into their tents, but Kyle couldn't fall asleep for a long time, listening to the sounds of the forest and thinking about tomorrow. The morning was clear and fresh. They ate breakfast and swam in the cool water of the lake, and then they waited for Mike. The clock showed 10, then 11, but the warden still didn't appear. Maybe he's held up at the police station? Vlad suggested. Paperwork and all that. Maybe, Max agreed. Or the road is bad. It's probably a mess after yesterday's rain. Kyle paced nervously along the shore, looking at his watch. What if something happened to him? Or what if the poachers escaped? Don't get yourself worked up, Max cut him off. Mike's an experienced game warden. He's been in this forest for years. He can handle it. By noon, when the tension was at its peak, the familiar sound of a motor came from the forest. The friends jumped up, looking at the green wall of trees. Soon, the familiar Yui van drove into the clearing with Mike at the wheel. "Sorry I'm late," he said, getting out of the cab. "By the time we got everyone processed and all the reports filed. Bureaucracy, you know?" "Is everything okay?" Vlad asked. "Did they catch the poachers?" "You bet," Mike grinned. "There's no way they're getting out of this. We have physical evidence, photos, witness statements. They're looking at least 5 years in jail." He looked tired but satisfied. He took off his hat, wiped the sweat from his brow, and looked around. "Are you guys packing up already?" he asked, noticing their partially dismantled camp. "Yeah, we were thinking of leaving after lunch," Max nodded. "We have to be at work tomorrow after all. But first we wanted to wait for you," Kyle quickly added. "You promised to tell us about the cub." A strange smile appeared on Mike's face again. "Not just tell you but show you." He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a small metal object. "Do you know what this is?" The friends looked at the object in his hand with confusion. It was a whistle. An unusual one with multiple holes and resonators. "An ultrasonic whistle?" Vlad guessed. "For dogs." "Not exactly," Mike shook his head. "This is a special whistle that imitates the sounds a cub makes when it's calling for its mother. It's a very specific frequency. Not every human ear can hear it." "And why do you have it?" Max asked suspiciously. Mike gave a sly look. "You'll see in a minute. Just don't get scared no matter what happens. And most importantly, stand still. Don't make any sudden moves." Before the friends could ask anything else, Mike put the whistle to his lips and blew. The sound was barely audible, high-pitched, on the edge of perception, like the faint buzz of a mosquito. The warden repeated the signal twice more and then froze, listening. Several long minutes passed and nothing happened. The forest was living its normal life. Birds were singing, leaves were rustling in the wind, and somewhere in the distance, a twig snapped under the paws of some animal. "It's not going to work," Kyle began, disappointed, but Mike gestured for him to be quiet. "Hush," the warden whispered. "Look over there." He pointed to the opposite shore of the lake, where the forest came almost to the water's edge. The friends looked intently but saw nothing. And then suddenly, the bushes on the other side of the lake stirred slightly. Something large and striped slowly emerged from the green thicket and froze on the shore, looking in their direction. The bushes parted on the opposite shore, and a young tigress stepped into the open, graceful and stunningly beautiful. Sunlight played on her orange fur with black stripes, giving it a golden hue. Her powerful paws silently stepped on the lakeside gravel. She stopped at the water's edge and stood still, watching the men across the lake. The friends were frozen, unable to believe their eyes. The tigress was magnificent, not as big as a full-grown male but large enough to inspire awe. Her amber eyes seemed to glow with their own inner fire. It's, Kyle couldn't find the words. His voice trembled with excitement. "That's your cub," Mike said quietly, not taking his eyes off the predator. "Or rather, your tigress. She's grown and gotten strong over the past year." "It's incredible," Vlad breathed. "She was so small and helpless." "They grow fast," the warden nodded, "especially in the first year." The tigress continued to watch them, her tail twitching slightly. There was no aggression in her gaze, but rather curiosity, caution, and something else that was difficult to define. "Why isn't she afraid of people?" Max whispered. "Don't wild tigers usually avoid humans?" Mike smiled. "They do, but she's special. She grew up among people in the rehabilitation center. We didn't domesticate her. On the contrary, we prepared her to return to the wild. But she needed care in her first months, bottle feeding and treatment. So she got used to people. She isn't afraid of them, but she doesn't consider them part of her family either." Meanwhile, the tigress slowly entered the water. Her paws carefully stepped in the shallows, creating ripples on the lake's mirrored surface. "Is she going to swim?" Vlad asked anxiously. "Over here." "It looks like it," Mike nodded. "Don't be afraid. If she wanted to attack, we wouldn't even see her. Tigers ambush their prey, but she's showing herself openly. It's a sign of trust. Kyle stepped forward, but Mike held him back. Stay still. Don't make any sudden movements. Let her decide how close she wants to get. The tigress was already in the middle of the lake. She was swimming with powerful, confident strokes, holding her head above the water. Her gaze never left the people on the shore. But how did she know we were here? Max whispered. We just got here yesterday. I saw her tracks around your camp, Mike replied. She's been watching you. Maybe since the very first day. Tigers are excellent trackers with a magnificent sense of smell. I think she remembered your scent from a year ago. Or maybe she just felt something special. The tigress was already approaching their shore. Water streamed down her coat as she emerged from the lake a few dozen yards from the people, who were frozen in awe. Shaking the water off, she stood still, carefully looking at them again. She can't be our cub, Vlad whispered, staring at the majestic animal. It's impossible. Why not? Mike pulled a small object from his pocket and held it out to Vlad. Do you recognize this? Vlad took the item and gasped. It was an ordinary keychain shaped like a little tiger. A cheap trinket he had once had on his key ring. A year ago, when they found the cub, Vlad had taken off the keychain and tied it to a makeshift shoelace collar, just for good luck. He had completely forgotten about the small token, but the keychain was still there, worn and faded but recognizable. Where did you get this? He asked in astonishment. When we started caring for the cub at the center, we found this keychain on a shoelace around her neck, Mike replied. I saved it. I knew you'd come back. Meanwhile, the tigress took a few cautious steps toward them. She moved smoothly, gracefully, as if gliding over the ground. Her muscles rippled under her sleek coat, showing the immense power hidden in her beautiful body. Don't move, Mike warned. Let her do what she wants. If she gets close, don't look her in the eye. She might see it as a challenge. The tigress was approaching, and the men's hearts pounded faster and faster. Fear mixed with awe, disbelief with hope. Could this really be the same small, trembling creature they had saved a year ago? When the predator was just a few feet away, Kyle instinctively took a step back. The tigress froze as if assessing the situation, and then slowly crouched down on her front paws, lowering herself to the ground. Her tail moved smoothly from side to side. Does she want to play? Kyle asked uncertainly. Not exactly. Mike shook his head. It's a posture of greeting, of trust. She recognizes you not as friends but not as enemies either. More like acquaintances she remembers. The tigress stood up and took a few more steps, ending up right next to Kyle. The man's heart felt like it was going to jump out of his chest, but he stood still, following Mike's instructions. The predator stretched out her snout and carefully sniffed his hand. Her whiskers tickled his skin. Oh my God, Vlad whispered, unable to believe his eyes. She really remembers us. The tigress stepped back from Kyle and turned to Vlad. He froze, feeling his heart pounding. The predator approached him, sniffed him carefully, and then, to everyone's amazement, gently butted his thigh with her massive head. It was just like a cat sometimes rubs against its owner's legs. That's incredible, Vlad breathed out. I can't even describe what I'm feeling. The tigress finally approached Max. He stood completely still, only his eyes betraying his excitement. The predator walked around him, sniffing, and then let out a low snort as if saying, Yes, I remember you too. Animals don't forget kindness, Mike said softly. Never. Especially predators, especially cats. They have a phenomenal memory for scents, sounds, and faces. She doesn't just remember you. She recognizes you as the ones who saved her life. The tigress stepped back a few feet and suddenly made a strange sound. Not a growl but a soft purr, like a house cat's, only much deeper and more powerful. Is she thanking us? Kyle asked uncertainly. In her own way, yes, Mike nodded. In her tiger language, she's saying thank you. And something else. What? Vlad asked, not taking his eyes off the beautiful animal. She's letting you know you're under her protection now, the warden replied. It's an ancient law of the forest. Save a life and it will return the favor. This tigress will never harm you. On the contrary, she will protect you from any danger." The tigress purred again, then slowly turned and moved toward the forest edge. At the edge of the clearing, she turned back, giving them one last look as if saying goodbye, and disappeared among the trees, melting into the green of the forest just as suddenly as she had appeared. For several minutes, the friends stood silently, shaken to their core by the encounter. Kyle was the first to speak. I can't believe it. That was our cub. That same little frightened ball of fur. That was her," Mike nodded. "She grew into a beauty. Incredible, isn't it?" Vlad shook his head. "It's like something out of a different world. A fairy tale." "Not a fairy tale," Mike smiled. "Just nature. Everything is connected. And sometimes it gives us surprises that take our breath away." Max, usually the most skeptical of the three, looked stunned. "You know, Mike," he said slowly, "I've seen a lot in my life. But what just happened? That's probably the most amazing thing of all." Mike nodded, looking where the tigress had disappeared. "And that's not all, my friends. Not all. I have one more surprise for you." The friends stood on the shore for a long time, looking in the direction where the tigress had disappeared. It seemed that something intangible had changed in the air after she left, as if the world had become a little poorer without the presence of this beautiful and powerful creature. "Let's go back to the fire," Mike suggested. "I'll tell you about her year." They returned to the camp, rebuilt the fire, and Mike began his story, sipping hot tea from a mug. "When I brought her to the rehab center, she was in very bad shape. Dehydrated, emaciated, and hypothermic. To be honest, the vets gave her no more than a 50% chance of survival. The first 2 weeks were critical. She hardly ate, she just slept. We fed her through and for and gave her antibiotics and vitamins. I even sat with her at night, warming her with my body heat, just like a mother tigress warms her cubs." He smiled at the memory. "And then she suddenly decided she wanted to live. She started eating on her own and became curious about the world around her. She was placed in a separate enclosure and given the right diet. And she started growing by leaps and bounds. An incredibly resilient creature." "What did you name her?" Kyle asked. "Cinta," Mike replied. "After Blue Lake where you found her?" Although at the center, she was officially registered as ST-17, the 17th cub in the population recovery program. "Cinta," Vlad repeated. "It's a beautiful name." "Yes, it suits her," the warden nodded. "She's also beautiful, graceful, and very smart. She learned everything right away. When she got stronger, we began her training to survive in the wild. We taught her how to hunt, avoid danger, and camouflage herself. Although a lot of it was already ingrained in her by nature. Instincts are a powerful thing." Mike threw another branch on the fire and continued. 6 months ago, we released her into the preserve. Total freedom. No enclosures. I was afraid she'd wander far away, because tigers are solitary animals and need a lot of space. But she stayed in the area. She made these forests her home. Sometimes I see her tracks, sometimes I catch a glimpse of her. She lives a full life as a wild animal. She hunts, she marks her territory, and she travels on her own trails. And she came when you called her with that whistle," Max said thoughtfully. "That's amazing." "Not exactly." Mike shook his head. "She was here the whole time. From the moment you set up camp." The friends exchanged surprised glances. "What do you mean?" "She was here?" Vlad asked. "We would have noticed. Tigers are masters of camouflage," the warden smirked. "They can be 30 feet from you, and you won't see them until they want you to. Cinta has been watching you since day one. I saw her tracks around the camp, all over the place." Kyle flinched. "Are you saying she was next to our tents all night?" "Exactly," Mike nodded. "And not just there. She was guarding you." "Guarding?" Max raised an eyebrow in disbelief. "From what?" "From any danger," the warden answered simply. "No predator will approach a camp that a tigress is guarding. Not wolves, not bears, not a lynx. Even poachers, if they were nearby, would feel her presence and go around." He paused, looking at the fire, then continued. The forest has its own laws as old as life itself. One of them is the debt of life. If you save someone, that someone becomes indebted to you. Cinta instinctively feels this. She remembers that you saved her, pulled her out of that stone trap when she was a helpless cub, and now she's repaying you with protection. But we just did what anyone would do, Vlad said quietly. It wasn't some heroic feat. For her, it was a heroic feat, Mike countered. Without your help, she would have died in that crevice. A life for a life. A simple and clear law of nature. They were silent, processing what they had just heard. Then Kyle asked, "So what happens now? Will she go back into the wild?" "She's already in the wild," Mike replied. "She lives like a normal tiger, but with a special relationship with you three. You are not exactly humans to her, and not exactly family. You're something in between beings she trusts." "Incredible," Max shook his head. "You know, I've always considered myself a pragmatist, but this completely changes my view of the world." Mike smiled understandingly. Everything in nature is interconnected. We humans often forget this, locked up in our concrete boxes in the city. We think we're separate from nature. But we're not. We're part of a single whole, links in one endless chain. And every action we take has consequences we don't even know about. He took a sip of his now cool tea and continued. "A year ago, you saved a small creature without a thought of reward or gratitude, simply because you couldn't do otherwise. And now that creature, having grown into a strong and beautiful beast, is protecting you, asking for nothing in return. Isn't that amazing? Doesn't that prove there's a higher justice in the world?" "What about the poachers?" Vlad asked suddenly. "Are they also part of this connection?" Mike's face darkened. "Unfortunately, yes, they are. They are a disruption to the balance, a destruction of harmony, but their actions also have consequences. Today they kill animals for profit, and tomorrow they themselves end up behind bars or face nature's retribution. Many poachers die in the wilderness at the hands of the very animals they hunt." "Speaking of the poachers," Max said, "what happened to the ones we caught? Will they really be held accountable?" "They already have been," Mike nodded. "All 4 have been arrested. The investigation is underway. There's more than enough evidence, from the weapons and hides to your witness statements. They're facing serious prison time." He looked at his friends with genuine gratitude. "Thank you for your help. I couldn't have done it without you. Not only did you save a cub a year ago, but you also helped stop those who were threatening the entire population. The forest is in your debt." "Come on," Kyle said, embarrassed. "We just happened to be in the right place at the right time." "I don't think it was a coincidence," Mike shook his head. "There are no coincidences in the forest. Everything is connected. Everything has a hidden meaning. As old hunters say, you don't choose the forest chooses you." The sun was already setting, painting the waters of Blue Lake in deep purple tones. The friends sat by the fire, lost in thought, processing everything that had happened over the 2 amazing days. "We should get ready to go," Max finally said. "We have to work tomorrow, and it's a long drive." "I understand," Mike nodded. "But know that you now have a special connection with this place and with Cinta. You can come back here anytime. She will know, and she will protect you." "We'll definitely come back," Kyle said firmly. "Next year at the same time. I'll be waiting," the warden smiled. "And so will Cinta." As they were packing up, getting ready to leave, Vlad suddenly froze, listening. "Do you hear that?" From deep within the forest came a distant, barely audible sound. A low, vibrating purr. The sound of a tigress saying goodbye to her rescuers. "She's saying goodbye," Mike translated. "And take care of yourselves." And in that moment, each of the friends felt an incredible, almost mystical connection to the forest, to this beautiful wild place, and to the amazing creature they had saved and who now protected them. It was as if some ancient wisdom had been revealed, hidden from the eyes of ordinary people, but accessible to those who had managed to look beyond the veil of everyday life into the deep essence of things. They left Blue Lake as different people, not only successful builders but also keepers of a secret, witnesses to a miracle, and part of an ancient law of nature where kindness always returns as kindness and a life saved becomes a shield for the savior. 5 years later, an SUV, after cresting the last hill, drove into the familiar clearing at Blue Lake. Now it was not Max's old UAZ, but a new Toyota Land Cruiser with the TriBuild logo on the doors. Of course, the car wasn't the only thing that had changed over the years. The friends themselves had changed, and their lives, and even the world around them. "We're here," Max announced, turning off the engine. "Right on time as always. And the weather didn't fail us." Vlad smiled, getting out of the car and breathing in the clean air of the forest. "It's perfect." Kyle was the last to leave the comfortable car interior and looked around. "Nothing ever changes. Every time we come here, it feels like time has stopped." This was their 6th annual trip to Blue Lake since that incredible encounter with the tigress. They came back every year at the same time, as if performing a sacred ritual. And each time, the trip became not just a vacation but a return to something important, profound, and real. A lot had changed in their lives over the years. TriBuild had grown from a small company into a large construction holding with branches in 3 cities. They had built not just one housing community but 5, had erected a business center in the regional capital, and had launched their own production of building materials. Their staff had grown to 300 people, and their annual revenue was in the hundreds of millions. But their most important project wasn't another residential complex or office building. 3 years ago, they had dedicated significant funds to building a new wildlife rehabilitation center in the preserve, where the little tigress Cinta had once been cared for. The modern building, with its state-of-the-art equipment, spacious enclosures, and a staff of qualified specialists, became one of the best centers of its kind in the country. "Do you think Mike is waiting for us yet?" Kyle asked, pulling backpacks out of the trunk. "He must be," Max nodded. "He hasn't missed a single one of our meetings." They quickly set up camp. Years of practice had paid off. The tents went up in minutes. The fire pit was lined with rocks, and their gear was organized in its proper places. And as if in response to their thoughts of Mike, a familiar voice came from the forest. "Hello, builders. How was the drive?" Mike emerged from behind the trees, still as strong and fit despite the added years. Only his beard had more gray, and the wrinkles on his weather-beaten face were deeper. Over the years, he had become not just a familiar game warden but a true friend. "It was great," Vlad said, shaking his outstretched hand. "The road's been improved. It's a pleasure to drive." "That's all you're doing," Mike smirked. "After you sponsored the road repair to the preserve, even the old guys from the village can get here in their beat-up cars." They sat down around the fire, just as they did every year. The conversation flowed slowly, about the preserve, the new equipment for the rehab center, and the latest successes of the Amur tiger population recovery program. "And how's Cinta?" Kyle finally asked the most important question. "Have you seen her lately?" Mike smiled a special mysterious smile. "Cinta's fine. She's now the rightful owner of this part of the forest. All the local predators know her territory and keep their distance. Even bears give her their kills if they run into her while hunting." "What about the poachers?" Max asked. "Have they appeared in these parts again?" "Not once since that incident." The warden shook his head. "Word spread fast. And your surveillance cameras around the perimeter of the preserve have been a big help. We see right away if anyone unfamiliar shows up." The surveillance system was another gift from TriBuild to the preserve. Modern cameras with motion sensors and night vision were installed along the main trails and at watering holes. "You know," Vlad said thoughtfully, "sometimes I think about how strangely everything worked out. If Kyle hadn't heard that cub squeak, hadn't climbed into that crevice. If Max hadn't decided to go fishing at this very lake," Kyle added. "If we hadn't become friends as kids," Max added. If only," Mike chuckled. "Nothing in life happens by chance. Every meeting, every event has a hidden meaning. Sometimes it reveals itself right away. Sometimes it takes years." He got up from the log. "And now I have a surprise for you. Come on." The friends looked at each other and followed the warden. He led them not to the lake, as he usually did in previous years, but deeper into the forest on a barely visible trail. They walked in silence, trying to step as quietly as possible. After about half an hour, Mike stopped and gestured for them to freeze. "Look," he whispered, pointing to a small clearing ahead. "Just be quiet." They carefully parted the branches and stopped in surprise. In a sunny clearing bathed in warm summer light, lay Cinta, their tigress, even more beautiful than they remembered her. And next to her, romping in the grass and playfully pouncing on each other, were 3 cubs, little striped bundles, smaller copies of their majestic mother. "She has cubs," Kyle breathed, unable to believe his eyes. "2 males and a female," Mike nodded. "They were born 3 months ago. The father is a tiger from a neighboring preserve. We brought him here as part of an exchange program to expand the gene pool." "They're magnificent," Vlad whispered, captivated by the playing cubs. "They're so lively and not afraid at all," Max noticed. "Cinta isn't leading them away, even though she must sense our presence." "Of course she does," Mike smirked. "She knows it's you and knows you're not a threat. In fact, she brought the cubs to this clearing herself, knowing we would come. She wants to show you her children." The friends silently watched the idyllic scene. Cinta stretched lazily in the sun, occasionally glancing in their direction as if saying, "Look how beautiful they are." The cubs were either wrestling playfully, climbing on their mother, or chasing butterflies flitting over the grass. "This is what it was all for," Mike said softly. "This is why you saved Cinta 5 years ago. You didn't just save one life. You saved a whole line. These little ones are the beginning of a new line of Amur tigers in our area, and their children will give rise to the next generation." And so on. Dozens, hundreds of lives that might not have existed if it weren't for your actions. The tigress seemed to hear his words. She got up, stretched her whole body, and looked intently toward the people. Then she let out a short roar, calling the cubs. They immediately stopped playing and lined up behind their mother. Cinta walked slowly and majestically across the clearing, straight toward the hiding place where the men were crouched. "Don't move," Mike whispered. "She's going to introduce the cubs to you." The friends' hearts stopped as the tigress came to a halt just a few feet from them. Her amber eyes carefully studied each of them, as if getting to know them again. Then she turned to the cubs and made another sound, a soft purr as if saying, "These are friends. You don't need to be afraid of them." The cubs looked at the strange 2-legged creatures with curiosity. They showed no fear, just a healthy curiosity and caution inherited from their mother. Then Cinta looked at the men once more, as if making sure they weren't a threat, turned, and led her cubs back into the forest. At the edge of the clearing she turned back, giving them one last look that said more clearly than any words, "Thank you. We remember." When the tiger family had disappeared into the thicket, the friends could finally breathe again. "Do you understand what just happened?" Mike asked quietly. "Cinta just introduced her children to you. She showed them that you're not enemies. That means these cubs will never be afraid of you. And when they grow up, they will also protect you, just like their mother. This is the rarest kind of trust a wild predator shows a human." They walked back to the camp in silence, shaken by what they had seen. It wasn't until they were by the fire, with the sun beginning to set, that Cal finally said, "You know, I've thought a lot about this over the years, about how one random event can change your whole life. We saved a cub without thinking about any reward or gratitude, simply because we couldn't do otherwise. And what was the result? The result was that everything changed. Not just Cinta's life," Vlad nodded. "Ours too. Look at what we're doing now besides construction. The preserve, the rehab center, the wildlife protection programs. Could we have imagined this 6 years ago? Everything is interconnected," Mike said softly, looking at the fire. "You saved a life and that life changed you. Cinta became a bridge between the world of humans and the world of nature. She reminded you that we are part of a single whole, that you can't separate yourselves from the world around you. This is ancient wisdom that modern humans often forget." Night fell on the forest and stars scattered across the dark sky, reflecting in the mirrored surface of Blue Lake. The fire crackled, casting strange shadows on the trees. Somewhere deep in the forest, invisible but palpable, the striped guardian of these places and her cubs roamed. And the friends knew they were under her protection, not just now, but whenever they came to this lake. Sometimes destiny comes on four paws, with a striped coat and amber eyes. Sometimes a life you save saves you in return from cynicism, from forgetting what's truly important, from being disconnected from the world. And that's when you understand a simple truth. Kindness, given without expectation of reward, always returns many times over, sometimes in the most unexpected ways. That is the law of the forest, the law of life, and the law of the universe. And deep in the forest, in her secret den, Cinta was licking her cubs, preparing them for sleep. These little cubs would become the new generation of the forest's rulers, majestic and free, but remembering that not all humans are enemies, that some can be trusted, and that sometimes the boundaries between species disappear in the face of true kindness and selfless help. And that perhaps was the most important legacy of that old encounter at Blue Lake. A bridge of understanding between humans and wild animals that, against all the laws of nature, had stretched across the years and would continue to exist as long as this amazing story of friendship lasted. Thank you for watching. What do you think about this story? Share your thoughts. Your feedback is very valuable to us.